Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back once again to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, I still have a couple of invite codes for Clubhouse if any of you are looking for an invite, but today, I'm going to be speaking with Matthew O'Connor, the CEO and co-founder of AdQuick, which is the first online platform that allows brands, agencies and individuals to complete the entire process of planning, buying and executing and measuring out-of-home advertising. And if you're new to the world of marketing and advertising, like me, because I am more of an IT guy, out-of-home advertising, which is often referred to as OOH, is billboards, bus benches, transit stations, vehicle wraps, as well as spaces on cartops, rooftops, and bike share kiosks, to name but a few. And in the past, out-of-home advertising campaign planning has been a painfully tedious process requiring dozens of phone calls, comparing prices and inventory, multiple copies of cumbersome spreadsheets and hundreds of back and forth emails. But technology has changed all that, and that's why I've invited Matthew onto the podcast. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to Austin, Texas, so we can speak with Matthew. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. My name's Matt O'Connor. I'm the co-founder and CEO of AdQuick.com. We are a platform to make it easy and measurable to buy out of home, so any ads in the real world. Prior to starting AdQuick, I had a cup of coffee at Amazon, helping build their Amazon Flex program. And prior to that, I spent a couple years in the early days helping build Instacart. So that's the most recent update on me.
Fantastic. And AdQuick is the first online platform that allows brands, agencies and individuals to complete the entire process of planning, buying and executing and measuring out-of-home advertising campaigns anywhere in the world. But you give me a few little hints there about your rich history in tech and with Instacart and Amazon, etc. But I'm curious, how did you get here? What put you on this path and what's the story behind AdQuick?
Yeah, it's a bit circuitous. I'll try to keep it concise for the purposes of our podcast here. But long story short, a couple times in my work life, I bumped into outdoor advertising. Once I had a bootstrap startup, and the second time was actually at Instacart. And in both instances, really just trying to see what was available and purchase outdoor advertising was extremely cumbersome. So it involved research project, reaching out to dozens of different companies, getting responses back, sporadically via email and attachments. And it was, completely offline. And the second experience at Instacart was in 2015, where you're basically starting to do everything else online. So we thought, why can't we just effectively Google this? And so maybe one day people will say, why don't we just AdQuick this? But that's the idea, is to make it more accessible, faster across the thousands of media owners that exist. And then as importantly, once you have transacted and booked the outdoor advertising campaign, what is that campaign doing for your company? So that's the second big piece that we've taken really a lot from digital marketing, where all of this can be done online. For instance, in Facebook, you set up, plan, execute, and measure the campaign. So we're building that same infrastructure for the real world.
Now, here in 2021, what problems do you solve with AdQuick for anyone listening that might not be too familiar or just hearing about you guys for the first time?
Yes, so I think there's kind of three main areas that we help with. The first is efficiency. So it's roughly 10 times faster to plan, buy, and execute through AdQuick because you're doing it all at once across any number of media owners. And as I mentioned, there are thousands of media owners, and out of home is a multi-media owner transaction. So we streamline all that throughout the process. The second big piece is optimization. So when you're dealing with lots of media owners and millions of potential locations, there are trillions of combinations of what locations would work best for a given advertiser. So we optimize that based on first-party data, rates of the media, and so using data and algorithms to surface the best combination of campaigns. And then the last piece is the attribution and analytics. So once you've done step 1 and 2, obviously brands want to know what their spend is getting them. So whether that's really making brand awareness a lot more quantified and scientific, or all the way down to the lower funnel of how many incremental app downloads did my company get. So we have a suite of attribution capabilities that flow through based on what was booked in the campaign and what data the advertiser can share with us so that we surface the ROI of the campaign.
And as this is a tech podcast, a question I've got to ask is, how is AdQuick leveraging technology to reshape that out of home advertising industry and bring it up to speed with this digital era?
Yeah. So, throughout the process, we work with advertisers, media owners, attribution data. So we're taking a lot of disparate data and stakeholders and bringing them together in our platform. Modern technology, React on the front end specifically, has been really helpful in allowing us to build responsive, dynamic, multi-user campaigns for advertisers. On the back end, of course, we're leveraging different forms of algorithms and data science and BigQuery technology that is more prevalent now. So it's a little bit easier to crunch and ETL large data sets than it had been. And then one of the things that we discovered as we were building the company is that the reason something like this hasn't existed prior is that most of the media owners are using Excel or PDFs to run their companies. And so the predicate for an online platform wasn't there. So we built software to allow them to bring their inventory online. So everything we do is empowered by technology. And then I think from the overall marketplace perspective, the ability to measure outcomes has gotten a lot more feasible because of the numerous consumer touch points that exist now. So if you think back, 10 years ago, it was really, when is this consumer going to see my ad and then go into a physical store to buy my product? That can be a large lag time. Now the consumer can Google that product from their smartphone in the moment, download that app immediately, share a post of the billboard. So the mass amount of data that's now being created, a lot predicated on smartphones, makes the outdoor advertising medium a lot more measurable because there are so many more touch points.
And one of the reasons I was excited to get you on the podcast today is because for anyone listening that has been following the global out-of-home advertising market and the trends, it was expected to reach an incredible $33 billion by 2021. But with 2020 poised to be a breakout year, COVID-19 happened. So I've got to ask, how do you see outdoor media playing out in this year, and especially when things are back up here in the UK, US, and indeed all over the world?
Well, anecdotally, I can speak for myself in that once things are safe to do so, I'm going to be outside traveling, do all the things that I have a renewed gratitude for. And I think there will definitely be a lot of that. In the short term, COVID-19 was, very bad for the overall industry with people sheltering in place. So 2020, was down, 30 to 40%, depending on your data source there. What I think will happen, and what we're already starting to see happen, is that a few things have really catalyzed with the advertising and marketing landscape. Is one, increased demand for flexibility. Obviously, planning times are going to compress, and the kind of old way of doing things where advertisers would plan out-of-home campaigns 18 months in advance has completely gone away. So that's really where we were coming from at AdQuick from the beginning, was more efficient, more versatility, more flexibility. I think the other big thing is that advertisers are also more open to different markets than they may have been. So a lot of brands really kind of rinse and repeat their approaches in large major metros because sort of if it isn't broke, don't fix it. Now they're realizing that people are moving in droves and their target customers are, throughout any given country. And so they're much more open to smaller markets, different markets. And so that's really what we're seeing from our advertisers, that they're looking into different areas that aren't historically as popular, but actually with out of home, you can arbitrage the industry because you're reaching the same consumers for 1/3 to 1/10 of the cost than you would in New York City, for instance.
And this form of advertising, of course, is the oldest form of advertising yet. It's the only traditional advertising format that I believe is experiencing significant growth at the moment. So as someone in the industry, how is innovation in inventory fueling this surge?
Yeah, so I think there's really kind of two major factors at play. One is endemic to out of home, is that there's a lot of innovation around adding new types of inventory. So I don't know how prevalent they are in the UK yet, but the digital taxi tops on top of Uber, Lyft, and ride shares, as well as retailers adding digital screens as a form of signage. So as digital signage costs have decreased, the ability to make new inventory has been made a lot easier from a capital perspective. So that's one big factor. And I think maybe the larger factor is that when you zoom out and look at the roughly $1.2 trillion advertising ecosystem, the major chunks of that are undergoing some levels of change and disruption. I think historically the largest channel had been TV, and cord cutting is accelerating. Another major factor is that ad-supported media consumption is declining, and that's been declining, but that's being accelerated by things like Netflix and Spotify, where previously those movies, TV shows, et cetera, would be ad-supported, but consumers are paying for that medium, and so that's shrinking the overall ad supply there. On the digital front, that's certainly still growing, but there's a lot more concerns around costs. Programmatic has basically taken over online advertising and is up to almost the 80 to 90% range of online ads, which has driven up costs significantly. So advertisers are looking for affordable, mass reach advertising, and that's really the strength of out of home as a medium. So I think those two things coming together are what are driving the overall growth in the industry. Of course, a short-term compression last year, but that will be reflected by out of home being one of the fastest growing mediums this upcoming year.
And I've noticed that many B2B and B2C brands are turning to out-of-home advertising to complement their digital strategy, as the price of digital ads has skyrocketed, especially during the quarantine period. And even if we go back before then, I saw so many great examples where things like billboards were turned into Instagrammable moments. And it's like those two worlds were colliding there as people were sharing the physical advertising. But how does technology make out-of-home advertising just as memorable as digital has been? Because I would imagine that you are ruled by metrics and it can be quite tricky too.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a statistic that 56% of people have shared or engaged with an offline ad, out-of-home ad on their social media. So creative can be incredibly powerful, where you come up with a pithy or contextually relevant ad and people share it and people engage with it. And the brand recall statistics with out of home are highest among any other channel. I think banner blindness online has become extremely prevalent as we get a little bit immune to things that we see online. And when you have an ad in the real world, consumers are not don't have their blinders on, and it's much more memorable. So that's one kind of anecdote on the memorability, brand building, virality side with out of home. You don't really see anybody sharing a web page ad that they were served, but you do see large amounts of people engaging with and sharing as from the real world.
That's so true. And I'm guilty of doing that myself on a few occasions too. And many brands will consider this traditional form of advertising to be a brand awareness tool and upper funnel tactic. But can I ask that you talk about how out-of-home advertising can actually be leveraged as a performance-based strategy and also a method to effectively gain conversions too?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's absolutely a brand increasing medium. There's no doubt about that. But what has always been happening is that consumers are more aware of your brand, but they're also taking subsequent actions. So one of the ways that we quantify the ROI is brands can see almost immediate lift in the performance of their online ads, because when the programmatic networks reward high click-through rates, consumers are more likely to click through when they're familiar with your brand. So we have a halo effect quantification that shows brands when you keep your digital ad spend steady and overlay out of home, the digital ad spend is actually more efficient because the consumers are primed to know your brand, engage with your ads downstream. Then there's just so many more touch points, as I referenced earlier. You can now download an app immediately from the Uber you're in or when you get home. And what we can do is with sample sizes, we can actually extrapolate back what the exposed audiences did. So if 10 million people passed your outdoor advertising and we have 10 basis points of that sample, we can match those consumers back to people who downloaded your app, for instance, and track whether that was a significantly higher portion than the people who did not pass your outdoor advertisement. So there's so many more touch points, so many more data sources, and so much more immediacy for the consumer to act on any given ad that creates a lot more data that we can tie back to the campaign. This type of action, I really think, was always happening, but was much harder to actually surface from a data and ROI perspective. But now we can do that. So that makes the medium more quantifiable and ROI driven. It also helps with advertisers being able to iterate and understand what's happening more quickly.
And data and measurement are key factors for modern marketers, and we were talking about it a few moments ago. But I'm curious, is there anything else or any tips you can share on how they can best track their campaigns' effectiveness?
Yeah, there's one simple example is to put a call to action on the signage and an SMS code to allow consumers to engage. So we had a client that used text lunch to a short code and get $40 in food and drink credit on your app. And so they had a direct attribution sub $15 cost per engagement from real world advertising. And so that's one tactic. And then the few I referenced earlier is tracking app downloads, associating that with the exposed device IDs, adding a pixel to their site allows them to also reverse engineer the exposed audience site conversions. So there's a lot of different tactics, but that SMS example is one kind of bread and butter example.
And if we do have any MarTech professionals listening, we may have swayed them and helped them see things with a fresh pair of eyes. Is there any advice to companies that might be thinking about integrating out-of-home advertising into their marketing campaigns for the first time? Is there any tips you can share on that?
Yeah, I think the general advice and something we help brands do all the time is experiment, analyze, then scale. So one of the big mistakes that we see advertisers that are new to out of home is they will go into a huge major metro with a very small budget and expect to be able to measure results. So one of the big things that they can do that's a little savvier is to go into a smaller market where the same budget will give them 10 times the share of voice and use that as an experiment market. So you can run a $20,000 to $50,000 campaign, actually measure it and understand what media types are performing best, what demographics are responding the most, and ultimately, what are the KPIs of the campaign? So whether that's the brand awareness, making that more scientific and quantified, whether that's halo effects and performance marketing improving, or whether that's lower funnel, things like app downloads, site conversions, et cetera. You can assess on a smaller scale what the ROI is, and then figure out, okay, based on these demographics and this ROI, what are the best markets for me to scale this campaign nationally? And out of home is certainly a global and therefore national medium. In the US in particular, there's a really high variance in pricing, media types, market to market. So you can identify similar markets that have that same demographic, a cost per impression that's as good or better than your experiment market, and identify and scale your campaign to those markets. So really, that's kind of the approach that I think new to out-of-home companies should deploy.
Well, a huge thank you for coming on and explaining so much about this traditional form of advertising that I don't think we talk about enough, especially in this digital world we find ourselves in. But for anyone that would like to dive a little bit deeper into this subject, can you remind everyone listening where they can find you online or contact your team if they've got any questions?
Yeah, absolutely. The main way is adquick.com, AdQuick.com. That has everything out of home related, and I'm more of a lurker on Twitter than anything, but my Twitter handle's Morrison OC, Morrison OC.
Well, I'll add all those links to the blog post that will accompany this episode, just so people can find you nice and easily. Just more than anything, just a big thank you again for taking the time to come on here and sharing how AdQuick is leveraging technology to reshape the out-of-home advertising industry and bring it into this and give it almost a technical upgrade to make it fit for the digital age. But thanks so much for sharing that with me.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.
The OOH advertising industry has made significant advancements with technologies, particularly workflow automation, to eliminate up to 90% of the back and forth to execute a campaign, which ultimately saves B2B and B2C organisations significant time and money while making it easier to incorporate out-of-home advertising into their overall marketing campaigns. But confession time. I'll be honest with you, before today's episode, I didn't know that out-of-home advertising included billboards, bus benches, transit stations, etc. Because, hey, I am the IT guy, not the marketing guy. So I've learned something today, and they do say every day is a school day, so I hope you learnt a few things too. But I'd love to hear more about what you thought. As always, email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Clubhouse, the list goes on and on. If you just have a quick look for Neil C. Hughes, you will find me nice and easily. And my website is techblogwriter.co.uk, where you'll find more about how you can work with me, and also over 1,500 other episodes. But enough of all that. All I ask is that you join me again tomorrow. We'll do it all again. We'll try and learn a few things and have a few laughs along the way. So thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.